When we think about the Viking Age or migration period, there is one particular location in Sweden that doesn't immediately spring to mind, although it does have some extraordinary bits of history: the island of Öland. Recently, a fascinating archaeological discovery has come to light here, which makes for the perfect pretext to talk a bit about this island. The discovery was made by an observant private individual who found a Viking Age armlet in a wetland in the Lutz parish on Öland. This type of bracelet, typically open ended and crafted from silver or bronze, is rare when made of iron. Only three of the more than 1,000 arm rings in the State Historical Museum's collection are made out of this material. The newly discovered armlet is decorated with detailed rows of dots and features animal heads at each end. Its excellent preservation is attributed to the oxygen poor conditions of the wetland where it was found. While similar artifacts have been found on the better known island of Gotland, this particular design is quite unique. The wetland where the armlet was discovered is also an unusual location. It might have been a sacrificial bog used for offerings to the gods or to higher powers. This raises the possibility of uncovering additional objects in the area, and actually, to explore this further, a metal detector survey is planned this spring to examine the surrounding site more thoroughly. The investigation will seek to determine whether the armlet was simply a piece of jewelry, perhaps lost, or a part of a larger ritual offering. Given its discovery in a wetland, it's unlikely to be linked to some sort of settlement or burial site, and this suggests it is very likely that we are, in fact, dealing with a ritual deposition. I was actually quite enthusiastic to see Öland on the archaeological news because, compared to other sites like Gotland, it doesn't really take the spotlight. So let's talk a bit about its history. Öland had strong connections with the Roman world, and that is evident from unique imports like bronze deities, military banners, and fortification techniques. For example, the fort's grating gate at Eketorp. During the Iron and Migration Age, no fewer than 15 ring forts were built that likely served as defensive structures as well as centers of power for local elites, or maybe also gathering places for local community, and could house large groups in times of crisis. They're also strategically positioned to control the Baltic Sea's trade routes and served as defensive outposts during periods of regional power struggles. Many of them remained partially excavated or unexplored at all, so who knows what might pop up from the ground anytime soon. Gold solidi coins were found here, and they would have been brought by mercenaries, key symbols of wealth and intergroup rivalry. The coins were either looted, earned as salaries, or collected by war bands from the disintegrating Western Roman Empire around 476 AD. The prosperity of Öland is also reflected in agrarian expansion into marginal lands, particularly in the southern Alvaret region. The late 5th century signals significant local conflicts, possibly linked to the breakdown of the Western Roman Empire and shifting alliances, as reflected in the massacre at Sandby borg. Excavations since the year 2010 have been revealing a well preserved site where time seems to have stood still since the massacre. The fort was abandoned immediately after the event, leaving behind quite a unique archaeological record. We are dealing with about 26 individuals, including men, women, and children. They were found scattered across the site, and many showed signs of blunt force trauma, including injuries caused by axes and swords. Some bodies were left where they fell, suggesting that the attackers did not bury their victims or remove the dead. This would indicate either a rapid retreat or a deliberate effort to leave the site as a warning to others. High status objects, including jewelry, Roman coins, gaming pieces, and weapons, were found at the site. These were left behind, suggesting that looting was not really the attacker's primary motivation. It seems to have been a targeted destruction and one to send a message. Houses and buildings within the fort show evidence of destruction, and some appear to have been set on fire. It looks like the result of a feud between rival elite groups on Öland, and that reminds us of the fragility of social and political structures, not only in the early Middle Ages, but generally. The bones also allow a more intimate glimpse into the lives of individuals who lived and died here. Some skeletons suggest malnutrition or disease, while others show brutal injuries. These were actual people living very troubled times, something we often forget when studying them. By the late 5th century, the stream of gold into Öland ceased and redirected toward Gotland and Helgö, suggesting political and economic decline. Öland transitioned from a relatively affluent society to a politically subordinate one, situated between the Svear and the Danish realms. So that means it could no longer boast an advantageous geopolitical situation. It lacked agency and was often at the mercy of larger Scandinavian lands. There are, however, some specific cultural markers. Male attire and weapons reflected interregional trends, while female costumes, including brooches and jewelry, displayed regional identities tied to political territories. During the 6th century, for example, Öland's female dress resembled Eastern Middle Sweden style. But in the 7th century, South Scandinavian influences dominated, indicating shifting alliances. By the early 8th century, Öland became culturally aligned with central Sweden, but broader territorial divisions became less clear, reflecting Öland's continuous fluctuating position. One archaeological highlight would be the Nabberor boat burial from the 8th century, situated at Grankullavik, a strategically important lagoon harbour. The burial contained an 11-meter long boat, human remains from 3 to 4 individuals, and animal remains as well: dogs, a horse, and a pig. Shield bosses with cuts and weapon fragments suggest the buried individuals were likely warriors involved in a violent conflict. Isotopic studies reveal that at least one individual and the dog were not local to Öland but came from the Mälaren region in central Sweden. Unlike typical boat burials of the Fyris Valley, that would be in Uppland, south of Gamla Uppsala, this one involved multiple individuals, and it may suggest an external or diplomatic mission gone very wrong. We can draw here a comparison with the Salme boat burials, about which I spoke in an earlier video on Eastern expansion and the beginnings of the Viking Age, so feel free to check that out later as well. Both Salme, dating back to about 750 AD, and Nabberor involved boat burials of warriors in strategic maritime locations, and isotopic evidence linked the deceased to the Mälaren Valley. Salme's burials contained 41 individuals, possibly from a Svear diplomatic mission, also gone horribly wrong, a potential parallel case to Nabberor, so not a raiding intent from the very beginning. Both sites would indicate the geopolitical struggles over controlling Baltic trade and the dominance of Svear and Danes during this period. Öland's economy was linked to the Baltic trade, particularly through goods like furs and processed iron. The account of the English Benedictine monk Wulfstan from the late 9th century described Öland, along with Gotland and other regions, as subject to the Svear. This aligns with earlier tribute agreements mentioned in the Guta saga, a very interesting story, a short legendary history of Gotland from the 13th century. On the other hand, the Karlevi runestone, dating back to about 1000 AD, on Öland commemorates a Danish sea king, and that would reflect a potential Danish political influence during the Viking Age. Later on in the 12th century, older ring forts were reconstructed under the Sveasial Birgerbrusa, suggesting continued military significance during times of instability. But then we also have the Danish influence. Resmo Church was built with the Danish tufa stone, and it showed architectural parallels with Roskilde, signifying continuous Danish involvement in Öland's religious and cultural development. Burial practices from the 11th century reveal a coexistence of traditional pagan sites and Christian churchyards, something we can also notice in other territories, and this would highlight the island's gradual religious transition. So by the late Viking Age, Öland remained quite a contested region. Danish influence resurged while Öland participated in Baltic trade networks involving Arabic wades as well as Permian silver rings, Permia being a region in Russia with Uralic-speaking peoples. Its strategic location in the Baltic made it quite an attractive target for raids by Danes, Estonian pirates, as well as other groups. Anyway, around 1100 AD, Öland was finally incorporated into the Swedish realm, possibly through violent conquest. Among other things, the continued reconstruction of the ring forts highlight its strategic importance in maintaining Swedish influence in the area. In a nutshell, Öland's history between 500 and 1200 exemplifies the complexities of a borderland caught between larger realms. From a wealthy and quite autonomous society to a politically subordinate one, Öland's archaeological and historical records reveal shifting alliances, cultural transitions, and a lot to wonder about. So I hope this was somewhat informative for you, and please subscribe if you haven't done so already. Anyway, I do recommend that you continue with this video here. It is a little bit about the Viking expansion in the east, which might have happened before the western one, and it includes the Sarema burials that I mentioned before. One last thing, I now have an account on Substack, so if you want to read my materials on the early Middle Ages, the Viking Age, Germanic philology, and many other things that keep me up at night, consider subscribing to my newsletter there as well. Thank you so much. This was Irina. All the best. Until next time.